All right, so let me tell you guys why I never deload and why deloads don't work for me.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So the reason I don't deload and that they don't work for me is because, quite frankly, I don't train at an intensity level to warrant a deload anymore. Sure. Now this is different for me now. Currently, my resistance training program is about 3 days a week. I'm never training to failure with heavy loads. I might train to up to and near failure with specific to my endurance,
sure,
where my thresholds are. But I'm not getting under a bar and trying to lift 3 rep maxes or 1 RIRs or anything like that anymore. It's just not where I'm at in my life, my lifestyle. So effectively, I never deload because I don't need to deload. I've never pushed the stimulus to a point where I need a recovery that warrants a week or several sessions worth of deloads.
Very few people do.
Yeah, so I think there's a big misconception there, about deloading, and just because it's in your program, doesn't mean you should do it. It doesn't mean you should do it.
Sure,
you kind of have to earn it, so to speak. But let's talk about for that person that's how do I know if I should be deloading, and when do I do it? So the concept of deloading is, let's kind of overview it.
Yeah. Yep. I think it's important to first look at why are deloads a thing? Why do people do them in the first place? What utility are we trying to extract from this? There are a couple points there. One is obviously fatigue management, and a good training program should have fatigue management kind of built in, right?
Not kind of.
It should. No, that's fair. It should
compulsory.
Be. Right. The better you can manage fatigue, the longer you're going to be able to extend a training block, a mesocycle, before you need a deload. Yes. If you even do. I mean, most people who are actively trying to improve, who are trying to actively get stronger or build more muscle at, the fastest rate, the highest rate they can, they're going to need them, right? But how frequently and what it should look like is going to be individual dependent. So we eventually get to a point, because we're pushing the stimulus over time, that the amount of stimulus we now need to continue to push adaptations actually exceeds what we are able to recover from in time for the next session. And so what we do is we have an extended recovery window. It could be upwards of a week, it could be 4 to 5 days, where, it can look different, but the point is to ameliorate all that fatigue that we've built up over the mesocycle and kind of reset ourselves. The second reason, building off of that reset, is if you are the type of person who is working on a program where volume is changing throughout the mesocycle, where you're accumulating volume over time, eventually you get to that same problem where you need more. Now you've adapted to that certain amount and you need more to continue to induce progression. And that amount that you need is now more than you can safely recover from.
Yes.
So that's an important piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's the important piece.
More than you can recover from. And I'm going to add the word comfortably because
that's relative.
Lifestyle needs to be, it needs to be conducive to your lifestyle. But so by having a period of deloading, we can actually resensitize to the delivery mechanism of that stimulus.
Yep.
And so once we start a new mesocycle, we may be able to start at the lower end of volume ranges for ourselves, and then again, titrate it upward over the course of that mesocycle. So
let's define mesocycle in this context real quick. So when we're talking mesocycle, what's the period of time you're thinking of? Because I know what I'm thinking of.
Anywhere from really 3 weeks to upwards of 12, depending on the person.
So this isn't a short period of time. So
it's like a 4 or 5 week, 6 week block.
I don't think people think that. I know people don't think 12 weeks down the line.
No.
And when I say people, that's a very blanket statement.
Sure,
I mean, those that have done this for a long time recognize the importance of that. But oftentimes people go week to week with their training plans, right? They're not thinking longer term. They're just pushing. And it's like one day they feel good and one day they don't feel good.
Yep.
And they're approaching it's very hit or miss. And so I'm pushing really hard today because I happen to have, 2 days of really good eating and a couple of really good nights rest. And then I come in, 2 days after that and I should be on this training plan, but now I'm like, I'm not feeling it. I was up late, stressed at work. I missed 2 meals, whatever else. And so that's going to happen anyway, but without organization. And again, going back to meso, macro, micro cycles of training and really going into a organized approach to your strength, performance, hypertrophy, whatever endurance training program, it's going to be tough to know when to deload.
Well, I do want to qualify that time window too, in that the more advanced you get, the shorter those windows generally become. So personally, I think I've had maybe one client ever who was able to make it a full 12 weeks before they needed a deload of some kind.
I love it.
But that's also not something that I programmed out in advance saying, okay, we're going to deload at week 13 after 12 weeks.
Yes.
It's something that you kind of do more reactively, not proactively.
Yeah. And it comes with a tracking. Yeah. There's a little bit of an art to it. You're right. I believe that's kind of training in general, because you're dealing with an individual, right? So there's a little bit of kind of like your spidey sense, like, I'm noticing some things. And so
you also learn your athlete over time.
Exactly. Too. You're building that relationship that comes with a high level of communication, not just, here's the program. Here's what you're paying me for, and send them in.
Programs are easy. They're dime a dozen, right?
But it's really checking in with yourself internally, whoever you are, the participant of the program, and looking at biofeedback, which is another conversation for another time. But understanding like what's really happening with you. How do you actually feel? Like what are some of these other now they're becoming more measurable with technology. I think things like sleep, things like recovery,
morning boner, like you don't lose a morning boner, dude. You just every time deload.
All that stuff for sure. HRV, like there's all kinds of things we can do a better job measuring now, which is again more specific to biofeedback. And again, that can clue you into when a deload might be necessary. And for me, again, going back to my particular situation, I don't deload because I'm not pushing, to that level. But at the same time, I also know when I might need to take a day off.
Absolutely.
And that's my deload. Right. So your deload could look different based on who you are, what your training program looks like,
and where you are in your training life.
You are. Yeah, exactly. Like what is your level of connection? Like what's your history? What's your experience level with all the things that we're talking about?
For sure.
So that's a really good point, in that like really we're going through this list of biofeedback metrics that we measure basically on a weekly basis. I may not be checking in with an athlete not that I'm not checking in, but not asking about these things over the first like 4 weeks. Once they've established that they're in the program, for the most part, I know at least week 2, week 3, week 4, they're going to be fine, assuming I've done a mesocycle with them prior, But around week 4, 5, 6 and onward, I'm going to be checking in with them weekly.
More frequently.
What's the quality of your sleep like? What are you motivated to go to the gym, or are you kind of dreading it? Training progress, is it moving along at the same rate, or has it started to slow down a little bit, or are you starting to regress? And
all important factors.
And all of these, are also with the explicit understanding that the other areas of your life that can affect your training are, for the most part, standardized. You're sleeping 8 hours a night, and you have a bedtime routine for the most part that, so your sleep is pretty similar night to night. You're eating relatively the same things, or at least the same calories and macronutrients on a daily basis. But those are things I ask about, because if performance dips, it may be they're overtrained and need to deload, but it also may be they slept like shit for the last 2 nights.
Or they didn't eat their fucking food.
Maybe
I didn't want to eat my other meal.
Maybe they're going through a breakup, and stress.
Absolutely.
Stress of all kinds comes from that recovery bucket that we have. And so we need to be able to ask about these things. And that's why it's going to be different from person to person and mesocycle to mesocycle.
The stress piece right there.
There's so many factors that go into it. So people are always thinking training, and what's the thing that's going to give me the edge, when they're not focused on the basics. And we've covered the basics many times in other podcasts and in our programs and so forth. I don't want to rehash that for the people that listen to us regularly, but the bottom line is the nutrition piece, the rest and recovery piece, the quality of the food, and the adequacy of the micronutrients and macronutrients that you're getting. All those things are important. The exercise is super important, but it needs to be, and that's one of the things that, quite frankly, is one of the easier things to manage that can be, or a measure. It's a little bit more fun to do. I don't know anybody that loves tracking their macros.
No,
right?
It's not hard.
I know people that love the result they get from tracking their macros, but I don't know anybody that loves tracking macros. But I know tons of people who track their workouts all the time. They're like, check it out, and they're religious. Jeff. Every time you're out there on the floor, he's got his tracker there, and he's
if you're not tracking your fucking numbers, you're not doing shit.
Yeah,
you don't like. How many times do I remember like, the fourth said, did I go up 5 pounds or not?
Right.
And then I need to fucking know that.
So here's the thing. So that's an interesting statement. So let's go back to me as an example, because I don't track anymore. Sure. I did for a long, long time because I had very specific goals that I was trying to achieve.
But that's very key. You probably did do your due diligence with all these things when you're building your foundation.
Same with macros, right? So there are some people that should be tracking more. more. There's probably some people out there should maybe be tracking less.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yes, so I have a sense. I have a like a pH, and I know when it's off, if you will, with specific to my training program. So again, I don't need to deload. My deload might be a day off, but my point is like I have this awareness of where my training is and where my strength levels are and aren't, and occasionally I'll go test myself.
Yes,
within reason, not off willy nilly.
To keep you honest,
to know where I am, right? Yeah. So like I recognize it was a couple of weeks back. There were a lot of pull-ups in my program. Right. And as a result, I wasn't really paying that much attention to it's not as a result, but as a result of the pull-ups, I had not been paying much attention to my mobility specific to my shoulders and my thoracic.
For sure.
And I got down on the floor one day. I was like, okay, I'm just going to check in with my mobility because I knew where I was. And I had it on video actually because I was working out with this group of guys and we had videotaped it. And I got down on the floor and I was like, holy shit, my shoulders and my lats are tight. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I had to revisit. And that for me,
that like a child's pose
because I knew, yes, because I knew. I got down and rode back onto my heels. And I stuck my arms on from me. Holy shit, this is awful. So that was my checking in piece. But that comes to what you just said, and that's based on my experience and my level. So people entering into programs now, it would be very beneficial for them to get on something that was organized and mapped out so that they get some consistency over time. And then they have kind of that litmus of now I can go back and kind of check and see where I was and where I got to, and they have some sense so that for me, it's like a very undulating program, right? It's not as periodized as it might be for some people, but I think people need to do more periodized programs so they can understand all that.
Well, let's quantify that. How many years have you been training?
Yeah,
exactly. So it's for
I'm
you
47
right now,
years old. I've been training since I was 12.
Tracking, right? But you have that framework.
Right. So that's what, like 25 years of tracking for the most part.
Yeah, there was a lot of tracking for a long time.
Yeah. And so I've talked about this before where you kind of earn the right to, I'm going to say have balance. That's what I've talked about. And it's kind of what you have right now. You have a balanced approach with
all my lifestyle, my training, everything.
Food. Yeah. But you've quote unquote earned the right to do that because you spent time putting in the reps. You spent years putting in the reps of understanding, how much food you need and how to feel and tell the difference when you need more or less, when you need more or less rest. So yeah, I mean, of course that's a point where you're at.
So getting back to the deload, I don't even want to talk to you about deloads unless you can tell me what your program has looked like and where you started and where you are now.
Correct.
Yeah. Right. Because I have nothing to gauge when a deload should happen and what we should be deloading, right? Or deloading to. And there's many different ways. And we've talked about this in other videos, but there are different ways to deload and which one I might recommend to you versus over another. Cause it's not just as simple as, we just take a couple days off.
Yeah.
Some people that can be very, very counterproductive.
Oh, right? So most of the programs you see, like for me, when I was deloading, when I was powerlifting, I'm basically doing roughly the same tension, right? I didn't want to pull away from tension. A lot of people talk about cutting the weight in half. I actually cut the volume in half and kept the tension because I wanted the same.
So you got the stimulus.
Yeah,
you got the stimulus. Yeah.
I wanted the CNS stimulus and I wanted to keep that same tension on the body, but I just lowered the volume.
And I've seen people start to refer to that as devolume, like a devolume week.
There's always a way for us to overcomplicate this shit, right?
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, you can watch that video we have our four most recommended ways to deload. You can check that out because we go through those things in details. In detail. But I think the point here is deloads can be very, very helpful. Yes. You sort of need to earn them. And the only way to do that is to have an organized training program that we can see history on so that we know and biofeedback would be even better if we had that alongside of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're a person out there that's wondering whether you should be putting in a deload or whether or not your deload is being is effective or not, start with the tracking and make sure you start tracking that biofeedback because that'll give you a whole lot more insight to probably when and how.
Agreed.
Like and subscribe.